My theme this morning is follow me. As if you will pick up in everything that we are talking about, following. Follow me. And I'm looking at mainly our lesson read from the Gospel of Luke, verse 51 to 62. A young lady from my church had just received her license and was given a car. She drove it to church this particular Sunday morning. And after service, she came up to me and said, "I'm driving now." Because occasionally I would take her home when she comes. So she came up to me and said, "I'm driving now." However, it was the first time she was driving, and she wanted someone to drive with her home. I said, "Okay." And when it was time to drive, I asked her, "Do you want me to go before you, or do you want to go in front?" And she said, "No, you drive in front." But I drive very slow. And she emphasized the very slow. So I said, "Okay." And as we drove, I kept my eyes on her through my rearview mirror. And there were times when I had to literally stop to wait on her, because I realized that when she got to the stoplights, after the light changed, it's like she had to build up courage to move. And so I learned that she's gonna take some time when we get to the stoplight, so I'll wait on her to build up that courage to move, as I figured out what was going on with her. So I tried to accommodate her in the driving, and it went very, very slow. And so I drove, because I was going so slow, I was able to focus on her through my rearview mirror and watch the road at the same time. And interestingly, when we got to her community, because I did say to her, "I have an idea where you're going, but I might miss my turn because I'm noted for that." So she was behind me, but as soon as we got to her turn, she put on the indicator long before I could think of putting on the indicator to let me know that we're going to take a turn. And so I took the turn. But then when I got in the community, I just kept driving and took a left turn when I should have taken a right. And what she did is she took the right turn, and then she went around the corner, parked, and came to look for me, because now she was in her familiar place. She knew where she was going. And I'm telling you this story because following demands certain things. Following someone requires that you have a faith that the person is going to lead you in the correct way, where you're going, or where direction. Faith, you have faith to know that that person is a person of his own word. And what he or she says they're gonna do it. One needs to know something about a person they are going to follow. And I can speak for myself. I need to know something about you if I'm going to follow you. I need to know where you're going. I need to know what you're going to do. I need to know when we get to the place what is going to happen. I need to know if it's going to cost me anything. I need to know how we're going to get there. And I need to have confidence that your motives are right. The story in Luke's gospel comes after Jesus sent out the 12, instructing them to take nothing with them and to go wherever they were sent. Wherever they were not welcome, they were to shake the dust off their feet and move on. Wherever they were welcome, they were to stay. The story also comes after the feeding of the 5,000. And after Jesus had the confession from the disciples, when he asked them, "Who am I? Who do the people say I am?" And they told him. It also came after the story of the Transfiguration, where Jesus went to pray with the disciples and they saw the glory of God transfigured in Jesus' face. Journeying with Jesus was filled with learning moments for the disciples. The disciples learned a lot. As they journeyed with Jesus, they learned a lot. And Jesus was on a journey toward the end. And that is why he was not concerned when he was not welcome into Samaria. Because if he was welcome in Samaria, what do you think would happen to him in Samaria? He would stay. He would linger. But his focus was on Jerusalem. And he knew that he had to go to Jerusalem. So he was not concerned about being delayed in Samaria. Jesus used the journey as a teaching moment. And he sent the disciples ahead, knowing that they were not going to be welcomed. He sent the disciples ahead, knowing that they had something to learn. The disciples were constantly learning, and they will not always be welcome. We need to be open to learning. As followers of Christ, we need to be open to learning, because when we think we know where we're going, something happens and it changes. You know, when I was coming this morning, there were certain parts of the road, and I get there, I said, what's going to happen here now? Am I going to go right or left? You know, so in our journeys, we get that all the time. And Jesus was also teaching the disciples that because you were rejected, it does not mean that it opens a gate for retaliation. So when the disciples wanted to pray to bring down, let me get the exact word, from heaven to consume them, Jesus rebuked them. Because Jesus was teaching them that you will be rejected. You will not always be welcomed. But it does not mean that you retaliate. It means that you show love. And that is something that as Christians we need to learn. That sometimes we are rejected, but we show love. I work as an hospice chaplain. And I work in the inpatient unit. So I get the families most times when their loved one is dying. And when it is very hard for them to accept that their loved one is dying. And so sometimes what I see in the unit is I see persons come and they take out everything on us. And we have to understand that it is not us, but it is what they are dealing with. They're losing their loved one, they're not ready for their loved one to go, and so they're angry. And we have to learn that even when they're angry and when they curse us out and everything, we have to show them love. We have to show them compassion. We have to show them understanding, because that is what is going to get them through. And as Christians, we have to learn that it's not all the time that we have to answer back. Because that is what Jesus was teaching the disciples, that we do not always have to answer with negative. But sometimes, in my country, we say, kill them with love. You know? So when everything goes wrong, you still kill them with love. You show love. And that was what Jesus was teaching the disciples. Following Jesus does not guarantee wealth or comfort. Following Jesus requires a willingness to make a sacrifice. Jesus, when the second person said, the first person said, I will follow you, Jesus said, foxes have holes, birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. And if we look at Jesus, we never read of Jesus having a home. Jesus was always traveling. He was staying with somebody else's house, but he never had a home. And Jesus was giving us the example that as Christians, if we are following him, there are going to be times when we have to give up even the very things that we love. in order to follow him. In verse 57 of Luke's Gospel, seeing and maybe feeling the rejection in Samaria, someone offered to follow Jesus. But Jesus said, I have nothing to give to you. And one interesting thing about this offer is that it was a person who willingly offered to follow Jesus. And Jesus refused the offer. Think about it. Jesus refused the offer because Jesus knew that this person was following him because he thought that he had something to give him. In all of Jesus' ministry, he was constantly showing to us what following him, that the sacrifices that following him means. Jesus was always on the move, and it is an example for us that as Christians, we need to be always on the move. I like the idea of the empty chair, because it is also saying to us that when we leave here, we have a job to do. And our job is that when we go in the community, we are going to make disciples, and we're going to try to bring at least one person next week. So we know that we need to fill that empty chair, and the chair will always be empty, because when we bring one next week, then the following week we'll still need another one. So I like the idea of the empty chair, because that's what Jesus calls us to do. Our lives must testify of what we believe. Following Jesus demands that we are prepared to leave our place of comfort and to go where we are sent. In our ordination vows in the Caribbean, there's a verse that says, you must be prepared to leave where you are not needed to go to the place where you're needed most. In Luke's Gospel, Jesus told someone to follow him, and he said he needed to bury his father. Jesus said, let the dead bury their dead. But you need to proclaim the kingdom of God. And of the three persons in the story, this was the only one that Jesus called. The other two offered to follow him. And he's saying to us that there's no retreat for the person. Jesus still, even though he said he needed to go bury his father, Jesus said, let the dead bury their dead, but you, I have a task for you. And the third person in the story told Jesus, I will follow you, but first let me say farewell to my household. And Jesus laid out the requirements of the kingdom. Once you start, you must continue. You must be committed. And Christianity is about being committed. You know, as a church, we get a lot of knocks because people expect so much from Christians. But if we are going to follow, we need to recognize that it's not an easy road. There's a song which says, it's not an easy road we're traveling, but many are the thorns on the way, because we will have thorns on the way. But we must be committed to have those thorns and to work through those thorny bushes. In the lesson in Kings, Elijah was to anoint Elisha as prophet to take over from him. And Elijah used the same word as the third person in the gospel. He said, let me go kiss my father and mother, then I will follow you. But Elijah gave him permission to go and do that. And then he came back and he was committed to the work. He became a servant of Elijah. But Jesus did not have that kind of tolerance. Jesus said, no one who puts his hand to the plow and look back is fit for the kingdom. Jesus calls us to follow, But this demands an action from us. Following demands an action from us. Jesus was not hitting out that if we're going to follow him, we must forget about the social support that we have. He was not saying that we must forget about our family. He was not saying that. He was not saying that we must let our dead bury themselves, because we know the dead can't bury the dead. But Jesus was saying that if you're going to follow me, you need to be committed. You need to stay focused. Because sometimes, I don't know about this church, but I know in my church, sometimes the hardest thing to do is to get volunteers to work in the church. Because the church means volunteering, so it takes second place to everything else in our lives. And Jesus is saying that if you're going to build the kingdom has to have priority. The kingdom has to have priority in your life. Because let's face it, if someone is not committed to setting up the elements for the communion, what is going to happen on a Sunday morning? We're going to be coming and we're going to be shuffling to do it. If someone is not committed to preparing the chapel for worship, what is going to happen when we come here? We're going to find everything out of place, and we are going to be saying, oh, they didn't clean the place. Forgetting that I could have helped, right? So being a part of a fellowship, we have to be committed. This is our sanctuary. This is my place of worship. This is my congregation, so I have to put in something in it. And that's what following Jesus is. It's about putting in something. We're not saying that he must give you, we speak about giving tithe. But tithe is your money, your talent, your money, your talent, your time. Because all of that, because you need money to pay the bills, you need the talents to keep the fellowship alive, and you need the time to get the work done. So that's what following Jesus is. We have to be prepared to do all of that to follow Jesus. It demands obedience to the call, placing Jesus first, not using social obligations or his prior business arrangements as an excuse. It is not always not giving us an example to neglect our familiar business. Because, Joshua said, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. So being committed to Christ does not mean that we neglect our familiar business. It means that we put everything before the Lord and we allow the Lord to order our steps. Galatians 5 lesson tells us some of the requirements of kingdom living. It says, if we're going to follow Jesus, we have to have love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. The passage continues to say, those who belong to Christ have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. If we live by the Spirit, we are guided by the Spirit. In the story that I began with, the lady was able to follow me because I listened to her and I understood her very slow driving. Following demands that we listen to the sounds around us, because sometimes we don't listen well and we tend to lose what the other person is saying. Following demands that we listen. I focused on her and she stayed behind me. I observed how she was driving and learned her method of driving. Following means that we are prepared to learn. And she had the faith to know that I'm not going to drive away, leave her, I'm going to guide her. And following demands that we have faith that following Jesus is what we need to do. So we were both prepared to be led. And following Jesus as a congregation, as a person, we have to be prepared to learn. We have to be prepared to lead, to be led. And it is my prayer that as each of us seek to follow Jesus, we open ourselves and in faith reach out to the one who is able to lead us. I pray that we become very observant and listen to the things around us that points us to God's leading. And I pray that God will grant us the wisdom to become obedient servants. And I leave you with the words of this hymn. Jesus calls us o'er the tumult of our life's wild, restless sea. Day by day his sweet voice soundeth, saying, Christian, follow me. As of old, the apostles heard it by the Galilean lake, turned from home and toil and kindred, leaving all for his their sake. Jesus calls us from the worship of the vain world's golden store, from each idol that would keep us, saying, Christian, follow me. Jesus calls us by thy mercy, Savior, make us hear thy call. Give our hearts to thine obedience, serve and love thee best of all. So as we go through this week, let us remember that Jesus calls us, and he's always calling us. Jesus never stopped calling us. And so we'll sing our hymn of the day.